Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and this week we are talking farming and agriculture in Colorado. Very exciting stuff. But before we jump into our guests today, I would like to ask our audience to please visit cobrt.com while you're there. Sign up for our newsletter. Check out our events page. We're very excited. We're having our second annual View from the Top event on August 20th. That is a Monday, so check that out. Sign up for that. Get your early bird registration. And also check out this podcast and more at cobrt.com/radio-podcast. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests in studio here today. I have Nick Levendofsky. He is the Director of External Affairs for Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. How are you doing today, Nick?
I'm well, thanks, Alex.
Yes, wonderful. And I also have Dan Sanders. He is the Vice President of Front Range Energy. How are you, Dan?
Thank you, Alex. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yes, pleasure. And I also have Mark Sponsler. He is with Colorado Corn. He is the CEO of Colorado Corn. How are you doing, Mark?
I am doing well. Thanks, Alice. Happy to be out here in Paxton, Colorado on the Eastern Plains.
Yes, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. I am going to start here with you, Nick. Give us a little bit of background and why you decided to go with Rocky Mountain Farmers Union and what you've been up to lately.
So I'm fairly new to Colorado. I'm fairly new to the three states that we represent, which are Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. Rocky Mountain Farmers Union's been around since 1907. We're a progressive grassroots family farm organization, and really the three tenets that make up our organization are education, legislation, and cooperation. That's really the foundation that we stand on. I got my start with Farmers Union a number of years ago in Kansas, my home state. I started as a member there, and then I worked for the organization in a number of different capacities for about 3.5 years, and then I got the opportunity to serve as their vice president for a period of time, but then got the opportunity to move forward and up to Wisconsin, and I worked in Wisconsin in their Madison office doing government relations work for Wisconsin Farmers Union for about 18 months. So I was there prior to coming out here, so I guess I'm kind of like a baseball player. They just keep trading me, but I've been told now that I have to nail my feet to the ground and stay here a while. So that's kind of how I came about, but my role as Director of External Affairs for the organization basically encompasses all of the legislative efforts for the organization in the three states. I have a team of lobbyists that watch during the legislative session what's going on in each respective capital, so Cheyenne, Denver, and Santa Fe. We work together to make sure that our member-passed policy is understood and is followed, in the legislative process. And then, of course, I follow the federal level as well. I was just telling Dan that, between the three states, we have 17 members of Congress and the U.S. Senate. So a pretty big group of folks out there. And as I mentioned earlier, it's Farm Bill season right now, so we're watching that closely. And I apologize if I get a phone call or a text from a congressional office, but it is that time of year. So we got a lot going on.
Well, if you get that phone call or text, hopefully it's good news, right?
Yes, I hope so.
Yes.
So we'll know soon, hopefully.
Yes. And Dan, if you don't mind going over a little bit about Front Range Energy and your role there and how you ended up there.
Sure, you bet. Again, thanks for having me. So my father and I actually started the company back in about 2002. We located in Colorado for several different reasons, but we're one of 3 large ethanol producers in the state, using primarily corn for our feedstock. We produce about 48 million gallons of denatured fuel ethanol a year. The other facilities are out in Sterling and Yuma, and then actually Coors and Anheuser-Busch actually produce a small amount of ethanol from their waste beer streams. But yeah, so we started up the business in 2002. Like I said, we broke ground in 2005 in Windsor, and actually started that production just over 12 years ago in 2006. And so we're a local Colorado family-owned company. We employ about 33. We have 5 different products we produce out of a kernel of corn up in Windsor, so maybe something we'll get into a little bit more in our discussion. But I also serve as vice chairman of Growth Energy, our national trade group out of Washington, D.C. So with those efforts, I get to not only be on the production side, but also be on some of the legislative side and market development side that Growth Energy advocates for.
Awesome. I like that we have some legislative guys in here. It makes me very happy. And Mark, if you don't mind giving us a background on Colorado corn and what you got going on right now and why you ended up at Colorado corn.
Yeah, that's a long story, and it involves a wrong turn on the H.E. Bailey Turnpike in Kansas. But I'll try to do the highlights here. Grew up on a farm in southern Iowa. It's natural that I would end up in the corn industry, but came to Colorado shortly after graduating from Iowa State. Went to work in the fertilizer and chemical business for about 12 years, and then was hired by Coors to be an agronomist and barley contractor. Worked for them for about 10 years, and then was lured over to Colorado Corn to launch a precision ag subsidiary to help producers, with adoption and understanding of relatively amazing technology available to them. And then was hired in 2006 to serve as their executive director for both the Corn Growers Association, which is a politically active membership driven body, grassroots organization, as well as the executive director for the Colorado Corn Administrative Committee, which is the 1 penny per bushel checkoff organization that was established in 1987 to invest in research, market development, promotion, and education. The thing that really makes the difference, or that defines the difference between the two organizations, is the Growers Association has the ability, and one of their missions is to be politically active, whereas the checkoff board is not able to do that. So, but the two really serve a common purpose to help elevate the interest, the ability to be sustainable, financially, productively, and environmentally for the corn producers in the state. And I do mean field corn, not we don't work on behalf of sweet corn. That's a completely different crop that represents only about 1% of the corn grown in the state and in the nation. So typically, if you're driving around Colorado or the United States and you see a field of corn, most likely it is field corn that is used for either livestock feed or energy that would end up in Dan's plant there at Windsor.
Wonderful. Thank you for that background information. But to get started on really why you gentlemen are here interviewing with me today is to talk about the current trade market with ethanol, right? This is a big deal. We are under some fire here with NAFTA and trade negotiations with China. So whomever would like to start on giving a little bit of background on how that really affects or impacts your companies, your associations.
Sure. Well, thanks, Alex. Go ahead, Mark.
No. Go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was just going to say that, the ag side and the biofuel side are directly related, and so one affects the other. And what I can speak, I'll let Nick speak on kind of the agricultural side, but as far as the biofuels tariffs that have been recently being imposed by China primarily, we do have a tariff rate quota existing in Brazil as well. That's one of our largest markets for exports for ethanol. And then we have a European Union anti-dumping tariff going on, or litigation going on, I should say, right now. So it's becoming a bigger and bigger deal for biofuels because currently the industry produces over 16 billion gallons per year. So about 14.5 of that is absorbed roughly in the U.S. Domestic market, and so we have this larger imbalance of overproduction that is being exported currently. So last year we exported just over 1.3 billion gallons. Projections are a lot higher than that this year, depending on kind of what happens with these trade tariffs and barriers to international markets. But so we're projecting 1.7 to 2 billion maybe this year. So it's a big deal it's a big deal for agriculture and using that abundance of crops that we have out there to make biofuels, ship them internationally, compete in those international markets. So as we get reduced exports, it directly correlates to reduced use on the crop, and so it backs up that crop further. We already have an abundant supply of corn out there today that we need to find a ways to use for it. One of the most readily available uses for it is to convert that into fuel, and so it's a direct impact on the crop.
So yeah, that's some great information, Dan, and I just had to scratch out my old numbers from a couple years ago at 13.3 billion. So it's good to see that we're inching our way up there. But you know, when it comes to these tariffs and this trade retaliation that we're seeing right now, it seems that the farmer is starting to feel the heat of it. We're beginning to feel the brunt, and that's one thing that Farmers Union is extremely opposed to. I'm concerned about the direction that this administration is taking with some of this retaliatory trade wars and all of that. You know, the first round of Chinese tariffs are going to be worth about $34 billion. Those take effect on July 6th. The second round, which is worth about $50 billion, will be following. We support strong trade enforcement, but we want to ensure that family farmers don't bear the brunt of that. And that's what they're attacking right now, is the products that family farmers are producing here in this country. I was just listening to CPR this morning, and they were talking about Kentucky bourbon, and they were talking about grain that's produced here, and we're seeing some of the protein that we produce in the U.S. These are things that family farmers depend on. It's their livelihood. And when you start to see our trade partners, you know, coming against us because of actions by our administration, it affects our bottom line, and at a time when we're already hurting. You know, farmers are in an economic downturn of their own. Yes, the U.S. economy may be doing good, but when you go out into rural areas and you talk to family farmers and ranchers, and you get into those rural communities where they live and work and spend money, it's a problem, and it causes a ripple effect, because when farmers aren't making money, they're not spending money. So it affects Main Street. They're not trading pickups. They're not trading tractors or combines or other implements that they need to operate their farms, and those banks aren't loaning them the money to do that right now. So we're in a bit of a crunch, and this does not help when we've got situations like this. And when we're upsetting our neighbors to the north and south, like we are right now, it seems. You know, we're trying to get NAFTA renegotiated. The process has been long and drawn out, and we've already passed the arbitrary deadline that the Speaker of the House put forward. It looks like there may not be anything until 2019. Well, let's try to come together. Let's try to reason together and come up with a plan that's going to work for everybody, for each country that's involved, and especially put the farmers on a better standing so that we can weather this storm that we're in right now. Yes,
definitely. Mark, thoughts?
Yeah, that's excellent background, and I think both Nick and Dan made great points as to why this is such an important topic, trade, and how it affects, you know, farmers in Colorado. And I think, you know, we hear so often, Alex, how well, why is trade such a focus for organizations like ours, Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, and in the ethanol industry, when, you know, they point out that, gosh, we import corn where they consider Colorado a corn deficit state, and so it's easy for folks to kind of dismiss the importance. One really obvious connection that I would hope would be.
Actually, Mark, sorry, I'm losing you a little bit.
Oh, okay.
So sorry.
I'm okay. I'll reposition slightly here. Is this any better at all?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay. I was seeking shade, this will encourage me to be brief. I'm standing in the sun. Did any of that come through?
Yes. If you want to start it, Colorado's a corn deficit state.
Yeah, we hear that referenced an awful lot, and so it's not unusual for producers and business leaders to kind of downplay the importance of trade on Colorado farms. But one connection that should be apparent is that corn prices, no matter whether you're in Colorado or Iowa or Wisconsin, those prices are reconciled through the Chicago Board of Trade. So, it's so common that there'll be trade or export or crop production news for Russia or some other country that will affect the price of corn or even more commonly wheat, because it's grown in so many countries. So that world supply is definitely a strong factor in the prices that our producers receive because of that commodity pricing mechanism called the Chicago Board of Trade. But I would point to some key aspects of trade that may go overlooked by a lot of folks too, and probably some of your listeners, is that that roughly 32% of the United States gross farm income comes directly from export. And that encompasses more than corn, but really all crops. That's nearly a third of the entire U.S. gross farm income comes directly from farm exports. More specifically, and narrowed down a little bit to NAFTA that was alluded to earlier by in the conversation, was that there's speculation about, well, how important is NAFTA? And we find that since 1994, corn exports alone to our NAFTA partners, which would be Canada and Mexico, has increased over sevenfold, with Mexico being our number one trade partner for corn, and this is U.S., with more than 25% of all of our corn exports going south across that border. It's over $9 billion with a B, $1 billion worth of corn alone, and just as a little closer to home example related to NAFTA importance for Colorado, this is just Colorado, and just in 2016 we exported over $2 billion worth of products that direction, or to our NAFTA partners, north and south, and jobs relate to that as well. And again, in 2016 alone, 225,000 Colorado jobs were supported by trade with Canada and Mexico. So it's kind of a big deal, but we tend to kind of downplay it. We're not on a barge river system, and so the locks and dams discussion kind of goes east of us. But there's a tremendous amount of trade, both for the U.S. and particularly even for Colorado, that's related to Canada and Mexico.
Thank you for that.
And Mark, quick question from Nick here. Isn't Mexico looking further south now for a lot of their grain, corn and soybeans now?
They've absolutely been making rumblings about that, and I think early on in these discussions, months and months ago, one of our big concerns was exactly that, Nick. That almost immediately, in talks that emerged about restructuring NAFTA, they began strengthening those relationships with other countries, and it's difficult for us to know how much is posturing and how much is likely to result in a deal. But this we do know from conversations with U.S. Grains Council that we're active with, as well as the U.S. Meat Export Federation. We understand that trade internationally is not at all unlike trade decisions that citizens make in their local community. They're based on relationships oftentimes, and in a small community like Haxton, where I'm standing now, it's influenced by relationships that you share on school board or church choir, or maybe you're on the local co-op board with other farmers, and so you or your kids play basketball together. It's those relationships that have a profound impact. Without good relationships internationally, we understand that it's very difficult to have the kind of conversations and make those trusted deals that that are really the beginning point for product, going overseas. So relationships are important. It's hard to have confidence and expect that productive relationships are going to end up in deals if you're at odds with one another.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're spot on with that.
Oh,
It is
yeah.
all about relationships, right? That's
Yep.
that's how you make trade deals.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Somebody has to trust you before they're going to trade with you.
That's right.
And we're slowly tearing that down right now, to be perfectly honest. And you touched on this a little bit, Nick, but this is going to directly impact small family farmers.
Yeah.
Do we happen to know how many small family farms might fail if we don't get something taken care of now?
I don't have a rough idea of what that looks like right now, but I do know in my discussions with farmers all across our 3 states, and then, we belong to a national organization, National Farmers Union, that covers 35 of the 50 states. People are scared. People are worried because they're basically on the brink. I've heard that, most farmers are going to get through this year and they'll be okay, but next year could be the year that takes them down. I've heard of farmers that the bank is not extending credit. They're not giving them any more loans. They're not, there's banks that are telling them you need to do something. You have to sell land. You have to sell cattle. You have to liquidate. You have to have, you have to do something. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and that is a lot of what that's based on is what's happening in the markets. Mm-hmm. And then you throw in this trade and tariffs and the retaliation issue, and it makes it even worse. So we're seeing a lot of stress and much of it undue stress and that uncertainty. So we need to have stability. We need to make sure that there's a safety net to help farmers. And part of that is in the Farm Bill. You've got crop insurance. You've got programs that help keep people afloat, keep their head above water, those kinds of things. But that can sometimes just be a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So we've got to get ahead of this. I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel right now. I think this is something we're going to be in for a while. So the less that we can have issues with trade and uncertainty, the better it'll be for the family farmer, in our opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I don't think since the industrial... Oh, yes, Mark, please.
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt, but I would like to kind of chime in on Nick's comment there.
We have about a minute 30. Please, though, go.
Oh, I totally agree with Nick's comments. And I'll just throw out there that every farm operation has a unique fingerprint of debt and equity, and what happens when commodity prices are below cost of production is you have a depletion of that equity. Oftentimes it's held in land and equipment.
Yep.
Where that equity resides. So when their ratios get out of whack at the bank, then they have to take action to improve those ratios, and oftentimes it involves selling assets. And when things get really upside down, then they're kind of forced to sell their assets of greatest production, which is land. And once that happens, then they're really out of business.
Yeah.
So what we're hearing is exactly in line with what Nick's saying, that there's been a slow to moderate equity depletion over the last 2 to 3 years. We're headed for a very, very serious winter, the way things look from what we're hearing from our producers.
Wow, thank you for that. We're going to take a quick break here on Connect and Collaborate. Please stay with us. This is an interesting conversation. I'm full on board with it. Please be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Check out this podcast and more at cobrt.com/radio-podcast. And we'll be right back with these gentlemen talking NAFTA and trade deals and farming and agriculture in Colorado. Stay with us. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer. I'm so excited this week. We are talking farming and agriculture in Colorado. And I have 3 guests with me today. I have Nick Levendofsky. He is the Director of External Affairs for Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. Dan Sanders, Vice President of Front Range Energy. And by phone, I have Mark Sponsler, CEO of Colorado Corn. We're having a fantastic discussion here. I want to wrap up a little bit more on this trade issue, right? Because this is a big deal, whether we're talking international or the NAFTA deal. There's an article in Wall Street Journal that came out a bit ago. Donald Trump threatens new tariffs on $200 billion in China imports, and that's kind of a big deal, right? Mm-hmm. And that impacts you guys directly, yes?
Well, there's one thing I think it's key to point out here why the administration is doing this. Obviously, China is kind of the sore spot with the administration. They're trying to counter the trade deficit, the huge trade deficit that we have with China. And in doing so, what they're, unfortunately for agriculture, they're targeting crops and biofuels. They're not targeting it, but they're impacting it because the retaliatory tariffs by those countries are impacting crops and biofuels. And so you can understand the reason why the administration is doing it at one point, but the other side of it is the impacted industries like crops and agriculture and biofuels are some of our shining stars as far as trade goes. I mean, the U.S. is the top ethanol producer in the world, and we're now, like I said, going to be close to a 2 billion gallon exporter of our fuel across the world. Crops were certainly a world leader in crop production and exporting our agricultural products, and so it's unfortunate that it's impacting these areas that are actually wins for us as a country.
Wow.
One of the big issues when it comes to this is currency manipulation, and that's something that China has done and many other countries have done for years against the U.S. is they've manipulated our currency, and that's caused us to go deeper and deeper into that trade deficit. So when we negotiate these trade agreements like NAFTA, whatever it's going to be, 2.0 version, or for instance the TPP, which we withdrew from, that has to be a key part of that negotiation, that they cannot manipulate currency when it comes to this, because that hurts us in the long run. That hurts us as a country. It hurts the value of our currency. It hurts the value of our products. So when we go into these negotiations, if currency manipulation isn't at the top of the list, then we as an organization are going to walk away. And that was part of the reason why we didn't sign on to TPP, because there wasn't a guarantee that they weren't going to be allowed to manipulate currency. So that's just one of the issues that we have with it. So, Mark?
Yeah, I'd just like to punctuate that in Colorado we contribute to a lot of exports that might not be apparent, and one is a lot of our farmers grow multiple crops, and wheat is one of the major crops in Colorado. And I believe the number, Nick, you may know this, but I believe the number is that about 80% of wheat production in Colorado gets exported, depending on the year and the production. But it's a major portion. Definitely, I think it's more than half on any given year that heads for export markets. And two, to Dan's point earlier about exporting ethanol, for many years now, many recent years, we as the U.S. have been the leading ethanol exporter in the world, and that's really something. I mean, we for a long time we thought all ethanol exports came from Brazil, but that's just absolutely not true. It's a testimony to the productivity and the innovation of producers and people who started plants like Dan and his family did across the country. I'd also like to point to the livestock industry, where over 2/3 of Colorado's agricultural output, farm gate output, is in the form of livestock products, and certainly corn and other feedstuffs play a key role in helping grow those creatures, and beef and pork exports to countries like China that are being so contentious right now are a major part of our export picture, particularly as those developing countries, as they kind of come out of third world status, one of the first things that their citizens do as they increase their household income is to add protein in the form of meat. So we recognize exported meat and beef and pork and poultry products as very, very important. And those are some of these agricultural products are some of the easiest retaliatory items for countries to change, to add tariffs to when we're in these combative pictures.
Great points, gentlemen. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about this legislation that's running. You've got a farm bill, right? That's on the docs right now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Introduce what that means for all of us at the table here.
Yeah. So the farm bill is in Congress right now. The House passed their version the other day. Very, very tight margins, 213 to 211, as an organization, we were not supportive of it. Farmers Union did not support it from the beginning because it did not go the route that we felt it should. It was not a bipartisan bill. It was not a compromise bill. Too many changes that affect farmers and their bottom line. There were some work requirements for SNAP, beneficiaries that we weren't happy with. So we opposed it. Now, on the other side, the Senate that is working their version right now, they're on the floor right now working it, and it sounds like they'll probably have it wrapped up by the end of the week. It's a much better bill. It's a compromise bill. They came together in a bipartisan fashion. As we've known in farm bills in the past, that's how you get it done. And in order to do that, you have to have SNAP. You have to have the quote-unquote food stamp programs, nutrition programs, to get the farm programs that we in rural America need. And we're hearing a lot of pushback from folks about that, and it's important that we have that. It's been in there for 40 years now, and it's important that we have that because the rural voice and the rural representative in Congress is being diminished every election cycle. If you take a look at a map of the congressional districts, there's 435. Roughly 35 of them are considered rural by USDA standards.
Wow.
So you're dealing with a significant difference in representation. So you have to have urban support for legislation that benefits farmers. And if you look at it, if you look at the numbers, many rural folks utilize SNAP as well. You're talking elderly people, we're talking disabled people, and we're talking working families, and most importantly, children. These are the folks that are benefiting from it, and so you can look at the numbers across the country, and a lot of times in rural areas, those folks are utilizing those SNAP programs just as much as anybody in an urban area. So really, our urban cousins are very helpful to us, and we need to be helpful to them when it comes to this type of process, and that's why Farmers Union is supportive of the Senate's version of the Farm Bill. Hopefully through the amendment process that's taking place right now, we'll see an even better bill come out, and then they'll have to go to conference, and they're worlds apart. The House version is very different from the Senate version. So the chairman and the ranking member from both the House and Senate Ag committees will have to come together, and they'll have to find some common ground. But at the end of the day, they have to remember September 30 is the deadline. That's when the current version of the Farm Bill expires. So they only have a little bit of time in July because they're going to take off recess here next week for the 4th. Then they're going to come back in and they'll work for another week or two, and then there'll be some type of recess take place in August. We aren't sure. Senator McConnell hasn't said if it's going to be the full month of August that they get off or if they only get 2 weeks off. I'm hearing rumblings that it's only going to be about 2 weeks, but we also have to remember it's an election year. And these folks, many of them are running for re-election, either to keep their jobs or to run for another job back home. And so they're running out of time. And you know, my concern is that they're not going to be able to come together in the time that they need to, and that there'll be some type of an extension, whether it's 6 months or a year, which is fine. I mean, we've done that before. I'd rather we have a good bill at the end of the day that's going to work for farmers and ranchers and for consumers than have something that's not.
Absolutely. I'm going to change gears one more time on you guys, and let's talk about this renewable fuel standard, RFS, as your industries call it, probably. So let's Do you mind explaining that to the layman, exactly what that is and your industries and how
Sure.
they're involved in that?
Sure. Yeah, I can give you a high-level look at it. So it's the Energy Independence and Security Act actually began in '05, was amended and improved on and actually finalized in 2007 by President Bush at the time, and what it was a federal law to blend increasing amounts of renewable fuels into our fuel supply domestically, and it directly relates to what we're talking about with agriculture and the Farm Bill and whatnot. It was done at a time where corn prices and crop prices were at the floor, and farms were going out of business. Farms were struggling, had an abundant supply of crops. At the same time, we're importing 60% of our oil needs for our fuel in the U.S. And at the same time, we were getting our air quality was deteriorating. So it was meant to be a federal law put in place to not only absorb some of the crop, improve farm income, but also help reduce our imports for foreign energy sources and clean up our air that we breathe. And so it was originally targeted for 36 billion gallons by 2022. Some of the advanced and cellulosic production of biofuels have not gone on that curve, and so they've been reduced. The current 2018 volume obligations are just a little over 19.3 billion gallons. I'm hearing word that we're going to hear about 2019 RVOs coming out anytime now, slightly above that number. And so basically for the crop, general conventional ethanol made primarily from corn is set at 15 billion gallons. We've been in that mark for the last couple of years now under the renewable fuel standard. But what you're going to see is the renewable fuel standard also incentivizes production facilities like ours and others that will adapt to new technologies and kind of be the structure that these advanced and cellulosic gallons come from. And so it's really a long-term federal law. The statutory numbers expire in 2022, then it's in the hands of the EPA after that. And so basically it was a federal law put in place to help clean up our air, help farm income, and also help offset some energy imports we were doing at the time. And it's done exactly that. It's actually one of the most successful energy policies ever in the United States. It's built out over 200 biofuels plants across the country. Like I mentioned, over 16 billion gallons of domestic production in the U.S., largest production in the world. And we make a variety of products out of a kernel of corn. A lot of people think we just make biofuels. No, we don't. We make a very high quality cattle feed, multiple cattle feeds actually. We make dry ice and CO2 products, and so we use everything we can in the most efficient manner we can to produce our different products.
Science. Mark, thoughts?
Yeah. You know, well, this is a key topic and both exciting and you know, very very focal point of our organization. And so it's easy for me to get enthusiastic when I hear Dan talk about it. And one of the things that, and Dan, correct me, isn't it still 40% of our nation's oil that is still imported from foreign countries?
Yeah, and it's a big number still. And it's key for the listeners to understand is everybody thinks because we found this shale, especially in Colorado, we're a big producer of oil and gas in Colorado, but nationwide we were extracting all this oil and energy. And everybody thinks, okay, well, we don't need all these other sources of energy now. Well, it's exactly the opposite. And so because the administration has allowed oil exports now, you know, we are still importing 40% of our oil needs today. These are last week's numbers, actually, EIA numbers. And on dollar terms, it's about $350 million a day of U.S. wealth leaving our country. And so it's still a huge economic burden for our country and a security issue.
Yeah. And I would point out that a few years back when oil was more trading in the range of 120 per barrel, we were literally spending $1 billion, that's with a B again, $1 billion a day for imported oil. And so that number's, you know, roughly, you know, quite a bit less than that now, but I think Dan makes a great point that 40% is still a huge number. It's a point that I fear has kind of fallen from view of a lot of consumers, you know, with them paying more in the range of $2.50 to, you know, typically less than $3 per per gallon for the gasoline, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we are still importing tremendous amounts. We still have energy dependence on foreign countries, many of which are threats to our safety, and we continue to have to spend, armed forces resources to protect those supplies. So it's still a very important factor. It's a very motivating factor for the producers that I represent and Nick represents, that I think they take a great amount of pride in being a part of something that's sustainable, that's absolutely renewable, and it's cleaner than the alternatives. So it's while they have to figure out how to make a living doing it, it's something they feel good about being a part of, and that's energy independence.
And I think another point to point out, Alex, is that so the national average of gas price today, I mean, we're here, this can be at the highest price summer that we've seen in 4 years now, and the national average is $2.85 a gallon roughly. Well, ethanol is trading for $1.40 a gallon right now, and so it's by far the least expensive molecule in your fuel tank. It is by far the cleanest molecule in your fuel tank, and we're talking about a clean, least expensive product that we produce domestically right here, renewable. We use our own resources, and we do it year in and year out. It's not something that we're going to extract and someday it go dry on us. It's something that we can continue to utilize in the future.
Yeah.
And I like that Dan brought up the fact that the byproducts that come from the ethanol process is something that it's more than just one or two little things. There's a variety of byproducts, and one that I think is extremely important to our livestock producers are the dried distillers grains. That's the byproduct after the process. They can either flake it, make it looks just like a corn flake that you might pour out of your cereal box, or it could be like a wet cake even that farmers can feed their livestock, and that's something. When I think about ethanol, I think about our little bitty ethanol plant back home in Scandia, Kansas, that sits right next to a feedlot. And farmers can take their corn, their milo there, and they can sell that. It's processed, and then they can turn right around and come back and they can buy those DDGs or flakes or whatever, and then they can feed that to their cattle, and it's a great source of feed for their livestock. And it works out great for that feedlot that's right across the road, and then in the wintertime they're running that water through the livestock waterers, and they're not freezing up, and so it's a great cycle in a way. So that's just one example right there. And oftentimes the farmers that are selling their corn or their sorghum to the ethanol plant are getting a premium, even better than what the local grain elevator, which could be even be their cooperative grain elevator, can pay them. So there are some benefits at the end of the day most of the time.
So Alex, just just to explain it easily for the listeners, so we are the first user of starch for the corn that we buy. So all we're using to make the biofuels is starch, and so all the micronutrients, all the fats, fibers, proteins go back through our system and get distributed out to livestock. We make different products out of them, like corn oil and syrup, and this feed that Nick was speaking of. And so we only use a starch in the kernel of corn. So a lot of people say, "Oh, well, you're using so much of this corn crop to make biofuels, doesn't make sense." Well, we're only using the starch, and the U.S. is awash of starch, and so there's a lot cheaper forms of starch out there than corn, and so it makes sense that we also extract that starch, give the nutrients back to the livestock feeders, and it makes the whole thing work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, great. These are excellent points. I just wanted to punctuate that starch. Dan mentioned that we're awash in starch. He's absolutely right. Starch as a feedstuff component is the most abundant category of energy in the world. It's not like we're short of starch. The challenge, worldwide is getting it in the right places. That's something that other countries have to figure out. But he's absolutely right. We're awash with starch. This is a great way to put it to use, and the results of that process of making the first stop of a portion of our corn supply at an ethanol plant is the starch is extracted for use to make fuel. The result, the DDGs that Nick referred to, the dried distillers grains, are a very high quality, high in vitamins and minerals, high in protein. It's everything except the starch from that kernel of corn. And by the way, the protein is high enough that one of the reasons that livestock feeders like it is that they can when they buy DDGs, they don't have to buy other protein supplements like cottonseed meal or soybean meal. So there really is an energy credit there even that helps out on the livestock feeding side by offsetting the need for other products in order for them to have a balanced ration. So it's really, as Nick said, it's a wonderful cycle, and then even another byproduct from the livestock feeding industry, which is in the form of waste, manure, feces, gets cycled back to help grow more corn and feed stuff. So it really is a beautiful, ecologically friendly, sustainable process.
When I'm imagining this, like a hunter who utilizes all of the animal, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's essentially how I'm breaking it down and using it as an example. There's not a part that goes to waste at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and the industry's even getting better. There's new technologies coming online. We're actually going to look at converting the fiber into more biofuels. And so as technologies come online, the plants get more and more efficient. Our plant's 12 years old now. We've made significant improvements to our facility, and our facility was state-of-the-art 12 years ago and is a fairly new facility by all means, but we're still looking at those investments to kind of take it to the next level as far as efficiency and generate different revenue streams.
That's one thing about the ethanol industry. It is forward-thinking. You can say whatever you want about it, but at the end of the day, it is forward thinking. The fossil fuel industry, we're digging up dinosaur bones. But that's going to be there. There's always going to be that source. But at the end of the day, I think just as Dan has said, we're looking at cellulosic capabilities. They're updating ethanol plants every day. The one that I mentioned back home in Scandia, Kansas, they are now, going to be the leader in isobutanol. So we're moving forward, and that's what folks need to understand, and that's part of what we do in the industry is to educate them and help them to understand that this is the wave of the future, and that we want to be a part of it, and ensure that family farmers and ranchers can be sustained by the industry as well.
Yeah, it's really about using our agriculture and creating a product that U.S. consumers can go to the pump and have a choice to choose an American-made renewable product that goes into their fuel tank.
Yep.
So we have about 45 seconds here, gentlemen. Last thoughts on any of this that you want to make sure our audience hears?
Well, I just want to mention that you got to reiterate the fact that the ag community, biofuels community are directly related. One affects the other affects the other. So, these policies, federal down to state, they all have an effect. And so, we are working together with Farmers Union, with National Corn, Colorado Corn, and a lot of different trade groups coming together for this cause to really support American farm families. At the same time, put out a very valuable renewable product out there in the marketplace for consumers to choose.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. It has been a pleasure having you on today to kick off our talk on farming and agriculture for the Colorado Business Roundtable. Be sure to check out this podcast and more at cobrt.com/radio-podcast. We're going to update you on that legislation bill that is going through right now. And be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Thank you so much. It's been a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.